September 1959, the height of the Cold War. Two superpowers locked in a chess match where every move could trigger nuclear annihilation. In this deadly game, intelligence agencies operated in shadows, turning allies into enemies and enemies into assets. The KGB believed they had perfected espionage. They'd been doing it since Lenin's time, penetrating Western governments, stealing atomic secrets, building the most feared intelligence apparatus on Earth. Their methods were brutal, refined over decades of practice. They had moles everywhere. Their tradecraft was legendary. But in the early 1960s, they discovered something that fundamentally changed how they viewed their American counterparts. Show contrast between Soviet and American intelligence operations. The CIA wasn't just playing the same game with different pieces. They weren't simply copying Soviet methods with an American twist. They were operating on an entirely different level, one that combined cutting-edge technology, unconventional thinking, and a willingness to attempt the impossible. The KGB was about to learn that their rival across the Atlantic was, as they say, built different. And it all started with one of the strangest operations in intelligence history. To understand what happened, we need to go back to how these agencies operated. Because the KGB and CIA weren't just different organizations, they represented fundamentally different philosophies of intelligence gathering. The KGB, Komitet Gosударственной Безопасности, was the latest evolution of centuries-old Russian intelligence traditions. From the Tsarist Okhrana that hunted revolutionaries to the Bolshevik Cheka that consolidated Lenin's power, Soviet intelligence was built on three pillars: fear, infiltration, and ideological zealotry. Their methods were brutal but extraordinarily effective. Blackmail to control assets, honey traps to compromise targets, assassination to eliminate threats. They recruited ideological sympathizers across the West, true believers who would betray their countries not for money, but for the communist cause. These weren't mercenaries. They were fanatics. The KGB's training was legendary. Years of preparation, perfect cover identities, flawless tradecraft. Their agents could disappear into any society, any government, any organization. They played the long game, planting moles who wouldn't activate for decades. The CIA was different from the start. Born from the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, during World War II, it inherited a distinctly American approach to intelligence. Where European agencies relied on centuries of institutional knowledge, the Americans brought something else: technological innovation, psychological operations, and an almost entrepreneurial approach to espionage. The CIA's founding generation came from academia, business, and the military. They were lawyers, professors, engineers, and soldiers. They didn't have centuries of spy traditions to fall back on. So they improvised. They experimented. They broke rules that European agencies didn't even know could be broken. Where the KGB saw ideology as the ultimate weapon, the CIA saw leverage, financial, personal, political. Where the KGB saw elimination as the solution to problems, the CIA saw manipulation and misdirection. The Soviets wanted control. The Americans wanted chaos that served their interests. By the early 1960s, both agencies had scored major victories that shaped the Cold War landscape. The KGB had penetrated the Manhattan Project through Klaus Fuchs, handing Stalin the atomic bomb years earlier than expected. They had spy rings throughout Western Europe. Their agents sat in NATO headquarters, British intelligence, and the U.S. State Department. The CIA had orchestrated the 1953 coup in Iran, overthrowing Mohammad Mossadegh and installing the Shah. They'd toppled Guatemala's Jacobo Arbenz in 1954. They'd established Radio Free Europe to broadcast Western propaganda behind the Iron Curtain. They were pioneering aerial reconnaissance with the U-2 spy plane, flying missions the Soviets couldn't stop. The scoreboard was roughly even. Two intelligence superpowers, locked in an eternal stalemate. But then came Operation Kitty, and everything the KGB thought they knew about their American rivals was about to be challenged. Because the CIA was about to attempt something so audacious, so technically ambitious, so completely insane, that it would redefine what was possible in the world of espionage. The operation had a simple code name, a deceptively innocent code name, and it involved a cat. Picture this. It's 1961. CIA headquarters, Langley, Virginia. Office of Technical Services. A room full of America's brightest minds, engineers, veterinarians, surgeons, and intelligence officers, are having a very serious discussion about cats. Not metaphorical cats, not code-named operations, actual living, breathing cats, and they're discussing how to turn one into a mobile listening device. The problem they faced was deceptively simple. How do you bug Soviet officials who sweep for electronic devices multiple times a day, change locations constantly, conduct meetings in open spaces, and never let their guard down? By 1961, the KGB had gotten very good at finding CIA listening devices. Incredibly good. They had equipment that could detect the faintest electronic signature. They swept rooms before meetings, changed locations at the last minute, and held sensitive conversations while walking through parks where traditional surveillance was impossible. Traditional bugs were being discovered within days. Human agents were being caught and turned. Dead drops were being compromised. The Americans needed something completely unexpected. Something that could get close to targets without raising suspicion. Then someone in that room said, "What if we use a cat?" Not as a metaphor, an actual cat. The room probably went silent. Someone likely asked if this was a joke. But as they discussed it further, the logic became oddly sound. Soviet officials loved cats. Russian culture has a deep affection for felines. They're considered good luck, kept as pets in embassies, and allowed to roam freely through government buildings. Cats wandered through parks, embassies, and sensitive areas without anyone questioning their presence. Think about it. No one suspects a cat. No one searches a cat for electronic devices. No one thinks twice about a stray cat sitting near a park bench where two men are having a supposedly private conversation. A cat could get within feet of a target, sit there for minutes, and no one would ever consider it a threat. The idea was approved. Project Acoustic Kitty was born. The CIA spent the next 5 years and over $20 million in today's money developing this technology. This wasn't a simple gadget attached to a collar. This was invasive, complex biotechnology that wouldn't be matched for decades. They surgically implanted a microphone in the cat's ear canal, small enough not to interfere with hearing, sensitive enough to pick up conversations from several feet away. A tiny radio transmitter was placed at the base of its skull. A thin wire antenna was carefully woven into the fur along its spine. The battery, the most challenging component, was implanted in the chest cavity. This wasn't a quick procedure. It required multiple surgeries over several months, extensive healing periods, veterinary care beyond anything attempted before. And then came training, teaching the cat to go where handlers wanted, to stay near targets, to act natural while carrying surveillance equipment inside its body. The engineers solved problem after problem with obsessive determination. The cat got distracted by food during field tests. They experimented with neural modifications to suppress hunger responses during missions. It wouldn't follow directional commands. They developed behavior modification techniques using rewards and conditioning. The battery life was too short for extended operations. They redesigned the entire power system 3 times. Think about what this represented. The KGB had moles in MI6, the French intelligence services, and NATO headquarters. They had human assets who'd spent years building cover identities. The CIA had a cyborg cat. After 5 years of development, millions of dollars invested, and countless hours of training, Acoustic Kitty was ready for deployment. The target had been carefully selected, 2 Soviet intelligence officers who met regularly in a Washington, D.C. park to exchange information. Traditional surveillance had failed completely. The Soviets were too careful. They swept the area for electronic devices before every meeting. They changed locations at the last minute. They spoke quietly, walked while talking, and positioned themselves where directional microphones couldn't reach them. Electronic bugs had been discovered and removed. Human assets couldn't get close enough without raising suspicion. 2 strangers loitering near Soviet intelligence officers would be noticed immediately. But a cat? A cat could walk right up to them. A cat could sit at their feet. A cat was invisible. The first operational deployment of Acoustic Kitty was meticulously planned. Every detail had been rehearsed. The cat had been trained on similar park environments for months. The equipment had been tested dozens of times. The transmission range had been verified. Everything worked perfectly in controlled conditions. The cat was transported in a specially designed van parked near the target location. Inside, CIA technicians monitored an array of equipment: radio receivers, recording devices, signal analyzers. They tested the audio quality one final time. The microphone was working. The transmitter was broadcasting clearly. The signal was strong. Everything was ready. The Soviet officers arrived on schedule. They sat on a park bench exactly where intelligence predicted. This was it. The moment 5 years of work had been building toward. The technicians opened the van door. The cat stepped out onto the sidewalk, just as it had been trained to do. It oriented toward the park. For a brief moment, everything was going according to plan. Show slow-motion recreation. And then the cat walked directly into traffic. A taxi, driving down the street at normal speed, hit the animal instantly. The operation was over in less than 5 minutes. $20 million. 5 years of research and development. Countless hours of surgery, training, and preparation. Multiple teams of engineers, veterinarians, and intelligence officers. All of it ended on a DC street because a cat acted like a cat. Because despite all the training, all the technology, all the behavior modification, they'd implanted a microphone into a cat. And cats don't follow orders. Cats don't understand geopolitics. Cats don't care about the Cold War. The CIA officially shut down Operation Acoustic Kitty in 1967. Their internal memo, and this is a real quote from declassified documents, stated that the work done on this problem over the years reflects great credit on the personnel who guided it. But we have come to the conclusion that the program would not lend itself in a practical sense to our highly specialized needs. Bureaucratic speak for, this was a terrible idea, and we're never doing it again. The project was classified for decades. The cat's body was recovered and the equipment removed. The program files were sealed. And somewhere in CIA headquarters, someone filed a report explaining how they'd spent the equivalent of a small military budget on a cat that lasted 5 minutes in the field. But the story doesn't end there, because the KGB was watching, and when they found out what the Americans had attempted, their reaction revealed something far more important than the operation's failure. Here's where the story gets interesting, where a failed operation becomes something far more significant. The KGB eventually learned about Acoustic Kitty through their own intelligence networks. They had sources inside the CIA, informants in defense contractors, and analysts who pieced together fragments of information. They obtained partial documentation about the program, enough to understand what the Americans had attempted. And their reaction wasn't what you might expect. They didn't laugh. They didn't celebrate another American intelligence failure. They didn't add it to their list of CIA blunders to mock in internal briefings. They were genuinely unsettled. Because think about what Operation Acoustic Kitty represented from the Soviet perspective. The CIA had taken an absolutely insane idea, surgically implanting listening devices into an animal, and actually done it. This wasn't a proposal that died in committee. This wasn't a rejected concept gathering dust in a file cabinet. They had the funding, $20 million approved without hesitation. They had the technical expertise, veterinarians, surgeons, electronics engineers working together on a single project. They had the institutional support, multiple departments coordinating over 5 years. And they had the sheer audacity to turn science fiction into reality. Yes, it failed spectacularly. The cat died within minutes of deployment. But from the KGB's perspective, that wasn't the point. That wasn't what kept Soviet intelligence analysts awake at night. Cut to recreated KGB analysis room or use archival Soviet footage. The point was, what else was the CIA working on? If they were willing to create cyborg spy cats, if that idea could get funded, developed, and deployed, what other bizarre, innovative, boundary-pushing programs were currently in development? What other impossible technologies were being pursued in CIA laboratories and research facilities? The KGB suddenly realized they might be fighting an opponent who thought completely differently than they did. An opponent whose institutional culture encouraged wild experimentation. An opponent who saw failure not as career-ending disaster, but as acceptable cost of innovation. Soviet intelligence operated on proven principles refined over decades. Infiltration, get your people inside enemy organizations. Coercion, find leverage and exploit it. Surveillance, watch, record, analyze. They were very good at these things. Exceptionally good. Their tradecraft was taught in intelligence agencies worldwide. But they were conservative, risk-averse, bureaucratic. In the Soviet system, failure meant consequences. Projects that didn't work got people demoted, reassigned, or worse. Innovation was incremental, building carefully on what had worked before. Proposing something truly radical, like implanting electronics in animals, would have been career suicide. The CIA was throwing spaghetti at the wall to see what stuck. They funded long shots. They encouraged unconventional thinking. They accepted that most experimental programs would fail. And sometimes that approach led to failures like Acoustic Kitty, expensive, embarrassing, and ultimately useless. But other times, show images of U-2 spy plane, reconnaissance satellites, stealth aircraft. Other times it led to innovations the KGB couldn't match. Technologies that would define modern intelligence gathering. Capabilities that would help win the Cold War. The Soviets had just learned their opponent wasn't playing chess. They were playing a completely different game, with rules Moscow was only beginning to understand. Operation Acoustic Kitty wasn't just a failed mission. It was a window into fundamentally different intelligence philosophies that would ultimately determine which superpower prevailed in the Cold War. Show comparative images of KGB and CIA operations. The KGB refined and perfected methods that had worked for decades, even centuries. Their tradecraft was excellent, perhaps the best in the world. Their discipline was unmatched. Their agents were trained to perfection. Their operations planned with meticulous attention to detail. But they innovated slowly, incrementally, always within established frameworks. New techniques built carefully on old ones. Risk was minimized. Failure was unacceptable. The CIA embraced what we might call moonshot thinking decades before Silicon Valley made it a buzzword. They funded wild ideas that had slim chances of success. They encouraged unconventional thinking, even when it seemed absurd. They accepted failure as not just inevitable but necessary, the cost of finding breakthroughs. This wasn't recklessness. It was a calculated philosophy. Fund 10 crazy projects, expect 8 to fail, hope 2 succeed spectacularly. Consider some of the CIA's other programs from this era, and you'll see a pattern. Project MKULTRA, testing mind control through drugs, hypnosis, and psychological torture. Unethical? Absolutely. Many experiments crossed lines that should never be crossed. But it showed a willingness to explore the absolute boundaries of human consciousness, to ask questions other agencies wouldn't dare ask. The U-2 spy plane, Kelly Johnson and his Skunk Works team were told it was impossible to build an aircraft that could fly at 70,000 feet, above Soviet radar and missile range, and photograph installations with clarity. The Air Force said the physics didn't work. The engineering was too difficult. The costs were too high. They built it anyway, and it gave the United States eyes in the sky over the Soviet Union for years. Corona satellites, the first successful photo reconnaissance satellites. The Air Force insisted it couldn't be done. Satellites were too unstable. Film couldn't survive re-entry. The technology didn't exist. The CIA developed it anyway, creating a system that could photograph the entire Soviet Union from space, retrieve the film canisters mid-air, and process intelligence that shaped American policy for decades. Stealth technology, radar-invisible aircraft seemed like science fiction. They made it reality. The KGB had excellent human intelligence networks, moles in place throughout Western governments. The CIA was investing in technology that would define modern intelligence gathering and modern warfare. And here's the crucial insight that the KGB came to understand too late. The KGB's strength was also its weakness. Their rigid, proven methods made them predictable. Once you understood how Soviet intelligence operated, you could defend against it. Their political constraints limited innovation. You couldn't propose something truly radical in a system where failure meant consequences. Their bureaucracy killed creativity. Every decision required multiple approvals. Every risk had to be justified up the chain of command. The CIA's chaos was a feature, not a bug. Yes, they wasted $20 million on acoustic cats. Yes, Mkultra produced no usable intelligence and violated human rights. Yes, countless programs failed and disappeared into classified archives. But that same institutional culture, that same willingness to try the impossible, produced the U-2 Corona satellites, stealth aircraft, and technological capabilities that gave the United States decisive advantages. The Soviets perfected the espionage of the past. The Americans invented the intelligence gathering of the future. And Operation Acoustic Kitty, ridiculous as it was, represented exactly the kind of thinking that would ultimately win the Cold War. Today, Operation Acoustic Kitty is a punchline. It's referenced in books about intelligence failures, cited as a classic example of government waste, and joked about in spy novels and Hollywood films. Late-night comedians use it to mock government inefficiency. History professors use it to illustrate Cold War absurdity. But the KGB's concern was justified, and history proved them right to be worried. Because the same institutional mindset that created a cyborg cat also created the technologies that define modern warfare and intelligence gathering. The stealth aircraft program that produced the F-117 Nighthawk and B-2 Spirit bomber, aircraft that are essentially invisible to radar, allowing them to penetrate enemy airspace undetected. Technology that seemed impossible in the 1970s, now fundamental to American air superiority. GPS satellite networks that changed not just warfare, but civilian life worldwide. Navigation systems that guide everything from cruise missiles to your phone's map application. A technology so revolutionary that we can't imagine the modern world without it. Drone technology that revolutionized surveillance and combat. Unmanned aerial vehicles that can loiter over targets for days, strike with precision from thousands of miles away, operated by pilots sitting in bases on another continent. Cyber warfare capabilities that can shut down power grids, cripple financial systems, and disable military infrastructure without firing a single shot. Digital weapons the KGB never imagined when they were planting bugs in embassy walls. The Soviets eventually collapsed under the weight of their own rigidity. They couldn't keep pace with American technological innovation. Every time they matched one American system, two more appeared. They couldn't afford to match U.S. defense spending on increasingly sophisticated technologies that required not just money, but institutional cultures capable of producing breakthrough innovations. And it started with a simple philosophical difference. One side perfected what worked. The other side constantly tried new things, even when they seemed crazy. The Soviet system was excellent at incremental improvement. Take an existing tank design and make it slightly better. Take proven intelligence methods and refine them. But revolutionary innovation? That required risk tolerance the Soviet bureaucracy couldn't provide. Was Operation Acoustic Kitty a waste of money? By traditional metrics, absolutely. $20 million for a cat that died in 5 minutes is impossible to justify on any cost-benefit analysis. You could have funded hundreds of human intelligence operations with that budget. But was it a waste of institutional culture? That's a different question entirely. Because the willingness to try something that insane, to push boundaries that far, to think that creatively, that's the same mindset that produced every major American intelligence and military breakthrough of the Cold War era. The organization that could seriously propose, fund, and execute a plan to turn cats into mobile listening devices was also the organization that could build spy satellites when everyone said it was impossible. That could develop stealth technology when the physics seemed wrong. That could imagine cyber warfare before the internet existed. Acoustic Kitty failed, but the culture that created it succeeded. The KGB was right to be concerned. They were fighting an opponent who didn't just think differently. They operated in a completely different paradigm. One that would ultimately win the Cold War.